let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature that you want to deal with.
Yeah, it just so happens that I have a very pertinent question
Okay.
to the topic because I'm addicted to passion fruit, and it has been out of season. So I buy the frozen cubes, and I've been eating the frozen. So now that they're back in season, do I still say Shechayonu?
No, no, you do not. Although the fresh is better, significantly better than the frozen, since it has been available and you have been eating it, it's not halachically considered a new fruit, and therefore no shechianu.
Okay.
And this is the prime reason why, for many things, we don't say shechianu, because we have them canned or tinned all year long. Frozen. Well, the difference between the North American farmer and the Commonwealth farmer is that the North American farmer harvests his fruit, he eats what he can, and what he can't, he cans. The Commonwealth farmer harvests his fruit, and he eats what he can, and what he can't, he puts up in tins.
In tins.
Yeah, the tins. That's the whole difference.
I heard it the first time.
Okay. Tov, any other questions of a halachic nature that we should talk about first? Everyone's okay?
Any halacha?
Yes.
I was by something the other night, and we were talking about, like with tefillah, using a cleave for the first time without tefillah, and I was like, no, because I remember checking that that's not a real thing. I don't know. Some people think that, some people not. And then it ended up being like a suffix. We were looking it up online, and like whether you can use a glass that you get for one time without tefillah, and then we weren't sure. And then it was also a possibility that it was made in Israel. So what would be the
Yeah. Well, let me begin with your last point, and then which is a little bit tangential, and then we'll move to the primary issue. Nowadays, there are many sfekot, many doubts pertaining to the tevilah, the immersion in a mikveh of a new keli. Let me list the principal doubts. Here goes. First of all, the only utensils which require immersion in the mikveh are utensils made out of metal or glass. Metal is deraisa, glass is derabanan. Those are the only two materials which require immersion in the mikveh. Wood, utensils, bone, plastic, and anything aside from this doesn't require. Now, here, this itself introduces a fundamental suffix in Tevilas Kalim. The Torah explicitly mentions a few kinds of metal: gold, silver, tin, bronze, and lead. Those are the 5 metals mentioned in the Torah. Now, of course, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, he knew that there are all kinds of other metal, aluminum in North America, aluminium in the Commonwealth. Of course, there are many other kinds of metal in the world, but the Torah only mentions 5 kinds. This leads many poskim, like the Gaon Mavilna and the Igros Moshe, for example, to the conclusion that other types of metals, aluminum, magnesium, there's a whole long list of metals aside from the 5 mentioned in the Torah, none of the other metals are mikabel tumah, are subject to the rules of ritual impurity, and therefore an aluminum utensil requires no immersion in the mikveh. And of course, nowadays, few of us are using cast iron utensils. Like maybe you have a cast iron pan, but most of your metal utensils are not cast iron. They're some kind of stainless steel. And now the recipe for stainless steel, there's a huge number of recipes, but they're all very similar. Halachically speaking, stainless steel is a new metal which didn't exist in the days of the Torah, in the days of the Mishnah and Gemara. Does it have the halachic status of being a metal? Who knows? Suffolk, after all, and this is terribly important for many things. The question arises whether or not a Kohen is allowed to fly in an airplane where in the baggage compartment in the airplane is underneath where you sit. That's where all the baggage is. And in many flights, especially those coming to Eretz Israel, there's a dead body in the baggage coming for burial in Eretz Israel. It could be in other countries as well, but it's fairly common coming to Eretz Israel. Can the Kohen sit above that dead body? Tumah rises, and the simple, straightforward answer is no. Prohibited for a Kohen to be there. Or if the airplane flies over a cemetery, the tumah, the impurity rises, and if the Kohen is in the airplane, we're in trouble. The Igros Moshe says, the airplane is made out of an aluminum magnesium alloy. It's none of the 5 metals mentioned in the Torah. The whole airplane is not subject to the laws of ritual impurity. It's not makabel tumah, and therefore the airplane is mafsik, is an interruption. The body of the chassis of the airplane is an interruption between the Kohen and the tumah underneath, and therefore it's no problem. Well, this creates a suffix regarding the immersion of many utensils. Similarly, if your utensil is made out of Pyrex, Duralex, heat-resistant glass by any other name, this is not what they had in the days of Torah. It's a new thing. Suffix is tefillah required. So that's one category of suffix. Here comes a whole new category of suffix. In order for a utensil to require tefillah in the mikveh, it must have been previously owned by a non-Jew and is now owned by you, a Jewish person. When it comes into Jewish possession, and we're talking, of course, about kli seudah, a utensil which comes in contact with the food when the food is ready to eat. Well, in order to require tefillah in a mikveh, the utensil must have been previously owned by a non-Jew. Of course, as you correctly point out, if the utensil was made in Eretz Israel, probably by Jews, the wholesaler was Jewish, the retailer was Jewish, the customer is Jewish. Where's the non-Jew who is the previous owner of this? Now, of course, most of the kitchen utensils you buy are coming from places like China. But were they ever owned by a non-Jew? The utensils were produced in some huge factory, 500 slave laborers in a huge factory. True, none of them are Jewish, but they're not the owners of the utensil. They're just the slave workers. Who does own the utensils in the factory in China? The answer to this turns out to be fairly complicated because any factory large enough to export utensils is incorporated. Now, what does incorporation mean? Limited liability in some languages, be'eravon mugbal in Hebrew, bam. What does it mean? The idea of corporation is a new idea. The idea is a new idea. How do I mute people? Oh, here, I got it. Okay. The idea of corporation is a new idea, began in the 11th century around. It was actually Jews who invented the idea, Jews in the Mediterranean basin. But the idea of corporation is the following idea. If you personally own a company, a factory making whatever it is, and chas v'shalom, the factory does a lot of damage, then you are going to be liable for paying for the damage that the company does. That's personal liability if you are the owner of the company. Now, this, of course, will make people reluctant to become owners and entrepreneurs in business because if something goes wrong, they can wipe out not only the business, but even take away your home and your car and take away everything to satisfy the liability of, for the damage that you've done. The idea of incorporation was created in the High Middle Ages, or slightly before the High Middle Ages, 11th century. The idea of incorporation is the idea of a juristic person. Not a biological person like you and me. We are flesh and blood people. But there's also such a thing as a legal person. In the eyes of the law, a person, but not a living biological creature at all. That's a corporation. Just like a living flesh and blood person like you and me can own property, sell property, buy property, sue at court, be sued at court, sign contracts, just like a biological person can do all of this. This new idea of the juristic person, the legal person who has no physical status, or only exists in the eyes of the law, the corporation owns property. The corporation buys property. There are people who own the corporation, but the corporation in turn owns its property. Now, if the corporation does damage, the liability will be limited only to the value of the corporation, and they won't come after the private funds of the people who own the corporation. They'll be off the hook. That stimulates investment, and that's why the idea was created. Now, the question arises whether Halacha recognizes the legality of the corporation. If so, then there are many consequences to this idea. Let me list some of the principal consequences. Jews are not allowed to lend money or receive money with interest. But a corporation is not a Jewish person, even if it's owned by Jews. If the corporation is recognized by Halacha, as it is by secular law, as being a new person, it's not Jewish. And therefore, a corporation should have no problem with lending money and receiving money on with interest. And that's all our big banks. Well, not all the big banks, but most of the big banks are incorporated. Most big companies, anyone big enough to be on the stock market is surely incorporated. And that just with a wave of the hand eliminates the problems of interest, of rebate. Next, Maaseh Shabbos. If you own a business, you're not allowed to profit from that business operating on Shabbos, even if your employees are not Jewish. But if you own a corporation and the corporation is doing business on Shabbos, all is well. And therefore, you can own shares in a corporation, even though that corporation is generating profits on Shabbos. A third area where this is very important has to do with ownership of chametz on Pesach. You and I are prohibited from owning chametz on Pesach. But if I have shares in a corporation, I'm an owner of a corporation, even if all the owners of a corporation are Jewish, can the corporation own chametz on Pesach? If Halacha acknowledges the validity of the corporation, then there's no objection to the corporation owning chametz on Pesach, even though all the owners of the corporation are Jewish. The Jews own the corporation. The corporation, in the eyes of secular law, is surely a new person. If Halacha acknowledges that, then there's no objection to having shares in a corporation, which in turn owns chametz, and any corporation large enough to be traded on the stock market surely owns chametz on Pesach. They serve pastries at executive meetings. They probably have kitchens for their workers. Anyone big enough to be on the stock market is surely owns chametz on Pesach. Now, let's try to think about this reasonably. Imagine for a moment the following scenario. Have you ever been to Amsterdam? It's a beautiful city, full of canals. The most important phrase that you must learn in the Dutch language, which they speak in Amsterdam, is the Dutch phrase over de gracht. Over de gracht means across the canal. Whenever you ask for directions to anywhere, that's always going to be the answer. Over de gracht, on the other side of the canal. In any event, imagine that you go to the tour of the Amstel Brewery. It's a huge brewery. And of course, tourists go for tours. You probably don't care so much about the tour, but you do get a free sample at the end. That's a good reason to go on the tour. So here's a person, not Jewish, a tourist, takes the tour. At the end, free samples are distributed, and this person drinks down his bottle of free sample, and then he picks up a six-pack of beer and starts to walk out the door. At this point, the guard stops him and says, "Excuse me, sir, everyone is entitled to one free sample, but you cannot walk out of the brewery with a whole six-pack." At this point, the tourist says, "Do you know who I am? I'm the owner of this brewery." And I take out of my pocket my share certificate, proving that I am an owner, one of the many owners, but I am an owner of this brewery. It's my beer, and I can take it wherever I want. Well, what's the guard going to do now? The guard will call his superiors, and the messages will go up and down the executive path, and eventually come back to the guard. And the legal advisors of the corporation will inform the guard it doesn't matter how many shares he has. It doesn't matter whether he's the principal owner or not. He owns the corporation, but he does not own the property of the corporation, and therefore he cannot walk out of the brewery carrying, nor can he pick up a computer from a secretary's desk and walk out the door with that. He's not the owner of that property. The corporation owns the property. He only owns the corporation. Well, if Halacha acknowledges the validity of this corporation idea, then the factory in China, which manufactures the dishes, the cutlery, whatever it is. Oh, cutlery is Commonwealth English in North America, silverware. North Americans are familiar with plastic silverware, for example, in plastic silverware. The North American English, what can you do with it? If Halacha acknowledges the corporate status of the factory that manufactures the cutlery and the dishes and the pots and pans in China, then they're not owned by a goy. It's a corporation. It's a new halachic idea, and therefore exempt from tevila. Well, most things that you buy in the market here in Israel, klei seudah, utensils that are going to come in contact with the food when you're ready to have some combination of these different sfeikot, which I have mentioned. And therefore, I personally do not recite a bracha when I immerse a utensil, because there are just too many sfeikot involved. Nonetheless, I do immerse the utensil, because maybe it really is an obligation. Maybe if it's metal, maybe it's even a Torah obligation. Is that enough about? Oh, no, I didn't. That was just a tangent. Now I have to come to your main point. It says in the Mishnah that a kli, a utensil, which is used only a few times in the Mishnah means up to 3 times. Utensil used once, twice, up to 3 times, but not more, is arai, a temporary utensil, and therefore exempt from tevila. In order for a utensil to be makabel tumah, in order for it to be subject to the laws of ritual impurity, it must be suitable for ongoing use. shimush choser in Hebrew, must be suitable for ongoing use. If it isn't, then it's exempt from tevila. Now, this is normally understood as a utensil which cannot be used for more than 3 times. Let me give you an illustration which will explain this point.
A pan, aluminum pan, or
An aluminum baking pan. Let's take that example.
yeah.
A motif, an idea which runs through the thinking of the Igros Moshe or Moshe Feinstein, an idea which runs through many of his tshuvas is the idea, the motif, that in making halachic decisions, we should ignore the affluence of contemporary society. At the moment, we happen to live in a time of immense affluence. Never in the history of mankind has there been such. But who says it's going to continue? What's going to be 3 generations from now? No one knows. Therefore, halachically speaking, we should ignore this. For example, take a one-time use, had pa'ami, one-time use aluminum baking tray. You bake your cake in it, whatever it is, and you throw it out. The only reason that you use it once is because you are wealthy. Back in the old days in Russia, where we were living in destitute poverty, if we had something like this, we would be very careful with it. We would clean it carefully. We would use it 100 times. Just because you are wealthy and therefore throw it out doesn't make it a temporary utensil. Its very nature is permanent. You are just wealthy and you can't be bothered to wash it, so you throw it away. If you're very wealthy and have fine crystal glasses, each crystal glass costs a lot of money, and you make a l'chaim and drink the vodka and smash the glass into the fireplace, well, it doesn't mean that it's a temporary utensil, it just means that you're rich, that's all. And therefore, according to Reb Moshe Feinstein, these require tevila. This is a controversial matter. Many poskim exempt these things from tevila. Similarly, the Rebbe Rashab, one of the Chabad Rebbes, was once in a train traveling from Poland to Vienna, the capital of Austria, because he had an appointment, a doctor's appointment. He was a patient of Sigmund Freud, of all people. And on his way to be analyzed by Sigmund Freud, they stopped at some train station somewhere, and he was thirsty. So he told one of the Hasidim to go out and get a glass of water. And the chassid comes back with a glass of water into the Rebbe. The Rebbe pronounces a bracha, drinks the water, and throws the glass out of the window to smash it outside, so that it would only have been used that one time, and therefore he didn't have to immerse it in the mikveh first. This opinion exists, quite respectable. Surely are going to smile upon people who want to follow the practices of the Rebbe Rashab. That's okay. On the other hand, those who are strict and following the approach of the Igros Moshe, that since the glass could be used many times, just you don't want to bother to do that, according to Igros Moshe, still requires tevila. So that's a machlokas. Now, of course, the question arises, if you hold that a utensil requires tevila, and your host is following the poskim that it does not require tevila, could you eat on that person's utensils? This is a question which comes up fairly frequently. I'll give you the most common context in which this comes up. The most common context in which the problem comes up is in restaurants and caterers. The Minchas Yitzchak, Dayan Weiss, originally from I always get these Hungarian towns confused in my mind. He was either from Grosswardein or Kleinwardein. I can never keep those two places straight. In any event, after the Holocaust, he ended up in Manchester. Then he came to Yerushalayim, where he became the head of the Eda Haredis in Mea Shearim. In his Manchester period, he wrote a tshuva saying that the utensils in restaurants and caterers, kosher restaurants, kosher caterers, of course, are not interested, they do not require tevila because they are not clay seuda. They are instead clay mishar. The utensils are used for marketing food. And as the Gemara makes perfectly clear, utensils used for marketing food, the bottle in which the wine is sold, the bottle is used to sell the wine. It's kli mishar, a commercial utensil. The bottle does not require tevila. If you empty the bottle, you drink all the wine, and then wish to reuse the bottle to hold water or anything else, now it's no longer a kli mischar. Now it's no longer a commercial utensil, it's a household utensil. Now it requires tevila. Well, not all the poskim agree with the Minchas Yitzchak, but since the Eda Haredis does not require their restaurants and their caterers to immerse their utensils, so of course all the other hechsherim cannot force their caterers and their restaurants to do it. Their caterers and their restaurants will say, "Why do we have to do it? They don't have to do it, so why should we have to do it? They don't do it." Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein disagreed with this whole approach, and he held that since the customer is using the cutlery, since the customer is using the bowls and the plates to eat from, that's called kli seuda. The meal that you eat in the restaurant or the caterer's is your seuda, and therefore he requires tevila immersion for all of these utensils in restaurants and caterers. And therefore, if he attended a simcha, a wedding or whatever, and typically the caterer was following the lenient opinion, of course, and not immersing the utensils, so he did not use the utensils. A plate, a flat plate, he had no objection to. He said, "I'm not using the flat plate. As far as I'm concerned, the chicken could sit on the table. The only reason they put the plate there is for politeness, but I'm not using it. As far as I'm concerned, it could be the chicken could just sit on the table and I would eat it. But the soup bowl, that he would not use, because without the soup bowl, you don't have the soup." One of my son's weddings, the caterer had the hechsher of the Eda Haredis and Mea Shearim, and one of the great Rosh Yeshivas of Yerushalayim attended the wedding, and he was seated at the main table, and I could not help but notice that he was eating everything with his fingers, which struck me as being quite strange. And then the light went on in my mind. Oh, the caterer is under the supervision of the Eda Haredis. They do not immerse their utensils, and he holds that they require immersion, so he's not using them. I went into the kitchen where the caterer was working, and I asked him, "Do you have some plastic cutlery?" And I found some plastic cutlery. I brought the Rosh Yeshiva some plastic cutlery, and he was very happy to be able to use that. Well, is that enough explanation? Let me add
Yeah,
one.
definitely. I was just the thing is I'm saying so if it's all right, then it doesn't need, but I guess people have thought that in some case if you're going to use it once, even though it's a permanent kli like a glass, then it's okay. So but that's not
Yeah, but
necessary.
if they plan to use it in an ongoing way, it's not exempt the first 3 times.
Right. Okay, fine. Got it.
Are you, when you're visiting in their home, let's assume for a moment that their position is a legitimate one. They're following a real posek who exempts them from tevila, but you are following the strict posek, and you hold that it requires tevila. Rav Shlomo Carlebach had the following simple, straightforward explanation. He writes like this: Imagine that you're eating in a restaurant where they do not immerse the utensils. Now, of course, tevila is required, immersion of the utensils is required only lechatchila. b'diavad, if the utensils were not immersed, the food is still permissible. Failure to immerse utensils in the mikveh never prohibits the food. The pots, the pans, the dishes, the cutlery, doesn't matter what, they will never prohibit the food, even though they should have been immersed in the mikveh and weren't. This is agreed to by all the poskim. So the food is okay. The only question is, what about using the utensil? Rav Shlomo Carlebach says as follows. You're in a restaurant, you go to the restaurant, you order your meal, and you say to the waiter, before the chef starts to cook, please bring me all of the pans that he's going to use. And before the chef puts the food on the dishes, please bring me those dishes. I want to take them to the neighborhood mikveh. I will bring them back to the restaurant, and then the chef can start cooking and he'll serve the food on the dishes that I immersed in the mikveh. Rav Shlomo Zalman is fairly confident that the owner of the restaurant is not going to let you take the stuff out of the restaurant. And therefore, this is a situation where it is technically impossible for you to do the thing you're supposed to do lechatchila. And the rule is that whenever you cannot do something correctly the way you're supposed to do it lechatchila, but you can fulfill the mitzvah in a way which is at least kosher b'diavad, of course you're supposed to go for the b'diavad way. And therefore, it's okay to use those utensils in the restaurant. Now, of course, the similar situation probably pertains in most private homes. If you would ask the owner, before you pour the vodka into the glass, can I please take it to the mikveh? I'll be back in an hour and a half. No, it's just unreasonable to think that they're going to agree to this, so it's already b'diavad, and therefore all is well. Okay. Is that enough about Tevila? Are there other issues that we should talk about today? Then let us turn our attention to Shechianu. Now, I usually get this, I know, share. Nothing happens. Share. Oh, now I got it. No. Share. Here it is. I think I did it. Okay. I hope you see it on the screen. Last week, we learned that there's this big machlokas, this big disagreement amongst the poskim. Many poskim hold that shechianu on a new fruit is a chiyuv, an obligation. You have to. Others hold that it's reshus, optional. And we saw different opinions on this issue last week. And we saw last week that the majority view is that shechianu is reshus, optional. But still, of course, given the opportunity to praise God, of course, it's commendable. Of course, it's praiseworthy. Of course, it's advisable. Of course, it's something you should do. But there's some distance between that and obligatory. We saw that last week. At the end of last week, we saw the opinion of the Rav Paul of the Ben Ish Chai, according to whom it's always preferable to do a mitzvah that you have paid for, that you've paid for. Given a choice, it's better to do a mitzvah that you've paid for rather than doing the mitzvah for free. If you buy an esrog and then someone offers you for free a second esrog, you should make the bracha and do the mitzvah with the esrog you bought, even if the second esrog, which was given to you as a gift, is a superior one, more muhuder. If someone offers you a new fruit to eat, you're a guest in someone's home, it would be better to refuse and then go to the market yourself and buy your own new fruit and make a shechianu. That was the opinion of one great rabbi, the Ben Ish Chai, that we saw at the end of last week. Now we're going to turn to the practicalities of exactly how to make the bracha. And I hope you will not be surprised that it's controversial. First, we're going to look at the opinion of those who hold that the correct order of brachas is first to say perpetuates or perpetuadama, whichever is the correct bracha, first to say the bracha, and then shechianu between the bracha on the fruit and the eating. Let's see this view and why many poskim follow this opinion. The Halachot Ketanot says as follows. Which bracha should you bake first? Perpetuates, or perpetuate if it's a vegetable, or shechianu? Which should you say first? Tshuva. Maresh, initially, my first thoughts, at first glance, Hava Amina, I thought, the Adif Tveil Hagdim Shechianu. At first, I thought it would be better to say Shechianu. Well, why did I think that at first? To make Shechianu before perpetuates. Because as we saw last week, the obligation to say Shechianu begins as soon as you see the new fruit, even if it's just growing on the tree and you're not planning to eat that fruit. Just seeing the new fruit on the tree is enough to say Shechianu. Well, since the Shechianu already existed, since you saw the fruit, it should come first. That should be the proper order of things. Further, mutav shelo lafsik ben birkas hapri la'achila. Further, everyone knows that you should not have any hefsek. You should not have any interruption between the perpetuates and the eating of the fruit. So here we have two good reasons why Shechianu should come first. After all, its obligation originated much earlier in time when you first saw the fruit. And secondly, you avoid the whole problem of hefsek, interruption between perpetuates and eating the fruit. That was my original thought. Shafti, but I did tshuva, and I realized that was wrong. And upon deeper reflection, upon mature reflection, I came to the understanding that first you should say perpetuates, because that's what we do on Sukkot. That's what we do on Hanukkah. We say first, Leishev Besukkah, Asher Kedishanu Mitzosav, V'tzivanu Leishev Besukkah, then we say Shechianu, and then we fulfill the mitzvah of eating the meal in the sukkah. That's the way we do it on Hanukkah. Asher Kedishanu Mitzosav, V'tzivanu Lahadlik Ner Hanukkah, or Ner Shel Hanukkah, then Shechianu, and then we light the candles. Well, it's well established in other areas of Jewish practice that the primary bracha comes first, and Shechianu, the secondary bracha, comes second. On the Vachim Techila Birkas HaMitzvah, we always make the bracha on the mitzvah first, and then Shechianu. Similarly, we should make the bracha on the fruit first, and then Shechianu. That's a widespread opinion, and many people are following this opinion. Now, let's see the other opinion. According to the other opinion, just the opposite is true. According to the other opinion, you should first say Shechianu, and then the bracha on the fruit. This is the opinion of the Chatam Sofer, the great rabbi of Pressburg, of Bratislava, which they moved. Today the city has been moved into Slovakia. These are his words. Ayin Barambam, take a look in the Rambam. Even though it's true that in every other context we first say the primary bracha al pidin ben, ner Hanukkah, leishev besukkah, and then shechianu, makom nonetheless, beperot to birkas pri todir. The idea is as follows. The key word here is todir, frequent. The bracha on the fruit is frequent. And the rule is when you have two mitzvahs before you, and you have to choose which mitzvah to do first and which mitzvah to do second, todir, v'she'eino todir, one mitzvah is a frequently occurring one, and the other one is not frequently occurring, tadir, v'she'eno tadir, the rule is tadir kodem. You always do the frequently occurring mitzvah first. That's why on Friday night, for example, we first say Boi Priagofen, and then the bracha of Kiddush. Why in that order? Because the bracha Boi Priagofen we can make who knows how many times during the week. The bracha of Kiddush is only once a week, Friday night. So the bracha of Boi Priagofen is more tadir, more frequent. It comes first. Well, therefore, you would think that you should make the bracha of Shechianu in the second place. Nonetheless, Ein Anu Nohagim Kain. Nonetheless, our minhag is to say first the less common bracha, namely Shechianu, and then the bracha on the fruit. He dismisses the thinking of the halachas katanas at the beginning of the page without giving any good reason. He admits that the reasoning of the halachas katanas at the top of the page is perfectly sound. Nonetheless, he dismisses it without giving any explanation or any proof and just ignores it. Let's see if we can have some better understanding of this. The Prima Godim, Rav Yosef Ta'omim was his name, 18th century Poland. He says, it seems to me, the Mevarech Techila Shechianu. I think you should first say Shechianu before the bracha on the fruit. Why? The Re'ir Ro'oi Levorech. Because you already could have said Shechianu when you first saw the fruit. Therefore, it should come first. However, in Birkas Achila Kodem, but if you said first perpetuates, then you can still say Shechianu, and it does not constitute a hefsek, an interruption. Why does it not constitute an interruption if you made perpetuates first? Because it's obligatory, and anything which is obligatory is not a hefsek, not an interruption. Let me give you a few examples of this, and you'll understand how it works. Imagine, for example, that on Yontif night, the first night of Sukkot, the first night of Shavuos, whenever, let us imagine that the Balabusta, the housewife, recited the bracha of Shechianu when she lit Yontif candles. In Ashkenaz circles, that's more or less standard. Now it's time to begin the meal. And the Balabus, the master of the house, he is saying Kiddush, and he is going to say Shechianu at the end of Kiddush. Should the wife, who already said Shechianu and already fulfilled her obligation to say Shechianu, should she respond Amen to her husband when he says Shechianu at the end of Kiddush? Of course she should, because responding Amen is a halachic obligation, and anything which Chazal require as a halachic obligation, of course, it does not constitute an illicit hefsek, interruption. It's something you're supposed to do, and therefore is, of course, permitted between the bracha and the eating. I'll give you one more example. At the chuppah, there are many brachas to be recited. Among the brachas to be recited is Bori Priagofen. Now, who's going to drink the wine? Chassan and Kala are going to drink the wine. But although the bracha, Bori Priagofen, has already been recited at the chuppah, there's a lot more procedure. Many more brachas are going to be recited before the kos is actually offered, before the cup of wine is actually offered to the Chassan and Kala. Should they be answering Amen to all of those brachas? Of course they should. It's a halachic obligation to answer Amen. And anything which is halachically required is not an illegal hefsek, an illegal interruption, something you're supposed to do. And therefore, Shechianu is correct if you say it between perpetuates and eating the fruit. Now we have the key to understand everything. Last week, we learned that some poskim hold that Shechianu is obligatory. Other poskim hold that it is reshus, optional. Those who hold Shechianu is obligatory have no problem with reciting the bracha between Borei Priya Eitz and the eating. It's a halachic obligation, and anything which is a halachic obligation does not constitute a hefsek. On the other hand, the other poskim who hold that Shechianu is reshus, optional, and you're not required to do it, well, if it's only reshus and not required, then it would constitute a hefsek, an interruption between Borei Priya Eitz and eating the fruit. You should say it first. Now we have everything explained. Let's just finish with the Mishnah Berurah, which gives us the most common mainstream practice. He says, look at the Prima Godim, which we just saw a few lines earlier. He says, L'chatchila nachon levarech shechianu kodem. He wants shechianu to be said first because he holds that shechianu is reshus, optional. Then you make the bracha on the fruit, typically Borei Priya Eitz, sometimes maybe Borei Priya Adama. Similarly, you can taste some of the fruit and then make a shechianu after. The Mishnah Berurah, as we learned last week, it represents the majority mainstream thinking, according to which the shechianu is reshus, optional, and therefore, of course, he supports the approach of the Chassam Sofer. Even though the Chassam Sofer didn't explain his reasoning, now we understand his reasoning. He held, like most poskim hold, that the bracha shechianu is optional. All this is good and clear, except for one minor problem. There's another passage elsewhere in the Mishnah Berurah where he's talking about making the bracha on a new talus. If a man buys a new talus, let's leave the question of women wearing talus for another occasion. Should the man make shechianu on a new talus? Well, the Mishnah Berurah contradicts himself, because when he's talking about making a bracha on the talus, he says, B'tchila birkas litatef. First, you make the bracha on the mitzvah, lehisatef b'tzitzis, and then you make the bracha shechianu. Just the opposite of what he tells us at the top of the screen. The Mishnah Berurah has contradicted himself. And this is one of a few dozen contradictions in the Mishnah Berurah. These internal contradictions in the Mishnah Berurah bothered me for many years, and I know that many people devote a huge amount of time and energy to try to harmonize clearly contradictory statements in different sections of the Mishnah Berurah. My mind was set at ease when I finally found the explanation for these internal contradictions in the Mishnah Berurah. It's a 3-volume set called Kitvei HaChavetz Chaim. You can buy in any Jewish bookstore a 3-volume set of all of the essays written by the Chavetz Chaim, called Kitvei HaChavetz Chaim. Very, very important stuff in there, including the Sefer Chavetz Chaim. In any event, his son wrote a Hakdama, an introduction, in which the son of the Mishnah Berurah talks about the biography of his father, the Chavetz Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah. And in discussing his father's life, he reveals an important truth. The Mishnah Berurah was not written entirely by the Chavetz Chaim himself. There were 3 authors of the Mishnah Berurah. The Chavetz Chaim employed one of his sons-in-law to write parts of the Mishnah Berurah, and he employed his son to write other parts. And the son says, when we submitted our contributions to the Mishnah Berurah, our father accepted them and published them as they are, even though they contradicted other parts of the Mishnah Berurah that he had written himself. Oh, so now I know why there are internal contradictions within the Mishnah Berurah, because there are three authors who did not always agree, and the three authors wrote different sections of the Mishnah Berurah. Now, the son, explaining all of this, gives a few examples of such contradictions, not the one we have on the screen. He gives a few examples, and he says, this was written by me, this was written by my brother-in-law, or this was written by my brother-in-law, this was written by my father. That's where the contradictions come from. So, there's one last issue to discuss, and that is which fruits to make a shechianu on. We began today with your question of whether to make shechianu on fresh passion fruit if you have been eating frozen passion fruit in an ongoing way during the year. And as I said, the answer is no. Even though the fresher passion fruit is indeed better than the frozen, it's not a new fruit for you, and therefore no shechianu. Let's see what the poskim have to say about this. First, the Marashag, early 20th century. Hina yadati v'shamati. I heard that the Beit Yitzchak wrote about the Rebbe of Zhidachov. Lo hayam mevarech shechianu al shum pri chadash, rak al anavim. The Rebbe was famous for never making a shechianu on a new fruit aside from grapes. Lachein, therefore, Yafeh katav b'sharei tshuva b'shem Agon Makubal Rav Tzemach. Therefore, the great Makubal, the great Jewish mystic, Rav Yaakov Tzemach, Hiftsiru b'Rab Chaim Vital, tried to convince Reb Chaim Vital, the great disciple of the Arizal, tried to convince him to eat a new fruit. Here, Reb Chaim Vital, a new fruit, make a shechianu, mach a brucha, pronounce a bracha, shechianu on this new fruit. Oh, Reb Chaim Vital took it and ate it without making a shechianu. Adinimo, and he was right to omit the shechianu. He rak rishus, after all. Most poskim hold that shechianu is only optional and not required, as we saw last week. V'chein asiti af ani pamachat. Once I was at a Suda, and they pushed me, they pressured me to make a shechianu on a new fruit they had. I ate it without the shechianu. The rule is, when in doubt, leave out. And since we learned last week that shechianu depends fundamentally on the simcha, it's the simcha you experience, it's the simcha which you experience that justifies making a shechianu. If you do not feel great simcha in eating a new fruit, so you surely do not want to make a shechianu. It's only the simcha that you experience that leads that. And here, the Rebbe Mezhidachov and the Marashag and Reb Chaim Vital did not experience great simcha in eating the new fruit, so they simply omitted the bracha. Only you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu know whether or not you are experiencing great joy, great simcha because of the new fruit. If so, by all means, recite shechianu. The Shevet HaLevi, Rav Vosner, in Bnei Brak, Nishma ben Achai, among the great tzaddikim alive today, we're talking about 25 years ago, Hayu gedolim v'tovim shelo berechu ela al shivas amim. Some great tzaddikim recited the shechianu only on the 7 species which are special because of the shvach, the praise of Eretz Yisrael. Gam ke'ela, rak al perot ilan. Other great tzaddikim made the bracha shechianu only on fruits, perpetuates, but not vegetables, perpetuadamai, even though vegetables were also seasonable in those days. Hainu destama ze'aya simchas libam. Everything depends on what you individually and personally experience whether you personally and individually experience simcha, only that justifies the bracha of Shechianu. And that's something that only you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu know about. Avalo al shar minim, these tzaddikim did not make Shechianu on other fruits or vegetables. Tanai, simchas libo, ve'eno, mishata atzmo. Of course, the simcha, which justifies the Shechianu, must be genuine. There is no one easier to deceive. There is no one easier to fool than yourself. You must not deceive yourself. You must not fool yourself. You must be genuine in experiencing the simcha in order to justify the bracha. If you experience the simcha, by all means, it's correct to say the bracha. These are the principal halachas of Shechianu. There's one other tiny detail which I want to delay for a couple of weeks, namely Shechianu during the period between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. Rosh Chodesh Tammuz is coming up at the end of this week, Shabbos and Sunday. Then we'll come to Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, which is a fast day, and between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, whether reciting a Shechianu in that period deserves discussion, but we'll save that until we come closer to when it's going to occur. At this point, let me ask you whether you have any questions that you wish to pose. Okay. And I wish you a good week and a safe week and a good Shabbos, and look forward to seeing you all again next Monday, a week from today. Until then, shalom, shalom.
So much.